Hey everybody, I just want to show you a brief example of how to do a macro and what to look for. We went through this in class and I just wanted to show you how we did it. And this is a really simple example, more simple than what you'll find in the textbook, but hopefully this should be a good basis for you to get started. So first of all, you'll note that I have a developer tab up here. And in it I have the code thing, and I also have this little macro recorder at the bottom. If you don't have those, then go to File, Options, and click on where it says Customize Ribbon, and make sure that the developer thing is checked. If not, find it on the left-hand side and move it over with Add, and then turn it on. Okay, so that's very important. If you don't have that done, then it won't work. Okay. First of all. Second of all, go to File, Save As, and save your file as a macro-enabled workbook. So I'm going to go File, Save As, put on the desktop. You'll notice here I have macro-enabled workbook XLSM selected. Okay, so if you have that, then you're able to run macros, and you'll notice up here it says XLSM at the top. Okay, so now our macro is basically super simple. It's just going to add the two numbers together next to it. Now, the first option that we have is use relative reference, and that means macros are recorded relative to the initial selected cell. Okay, so just like when we add dollar signs to something, that means that we're talking about that specific cell. Here, all we want to do is wherever we are, add two to the left together. Okay, so it's basically wherever we are. If it's here, it's going to add these two together. If we're here, it's going to add these two together. So we're going to use relative references because we don't care where we are. If you're over here, it's going to add these two together. We don't really care where we start. Okay, so I'm going to press record macro, and it's going to be called by default macro 1. And I have to pick a letter to make it work. In this case, I'm going to press Control J. Okay, just keep in mind that if you use Control Z or something else that overwrites an already used option like Control C or Control V, then you're not going to be able to use that option to cut and paste, copy, go back, etc. Because now only the macro is going to run using that. So I'm going to pick Control J for the meantime. And now we're recording. So you see that the little icon here turned to a square, and it says the macro is currently recording. And all we're going to do is press equals, grab this guy plus this guy, hit enter. And you'll notice that when we hit enter, we end up at the square below, right, by default. And that's it. I'm going to press stop recording. And now on the keyboard, I'm going to press Control J. I press Control J, it adds the two numbers together and goes down to the next one. Okay, I could do the same thing here. And again, when I do it here, it's going to add these numbers together. I press Control J, adds them together, goes down. So it's always doing two to the left, right? So I could go over here and it's going to add these two together, and so on. Let's say we add two numbers here, let's say 5 and 6, and I press Control J. It will add them together and go one down, right? Now, this is only doing one task, and if we go into macros, we can actually take a look at the code and see what it does. And I know it's scary, but really it's much easier than you think, right? Basically, it tells us to turn this on. We press Control J to run the shortcut. And it basically says we start from the active cell, and we take 1 to the left and 2 to the left, and we add them together. And that's pretty much it, right? So it says RC minus 1 plus RC minus 2, basically 1 over and 2 over, add them together, and then it says cell offset 1, 0, which means move 1 down. And that's it. Okay, so that's all there is to it. We could easily change these numbers. So if you're recording a big macro that has a lot of steps and you make a mistake, I could change these numbers. Let's say, for example, I'll change this to a 3, which means when we're done, go 3 down. Okay? Then I'll go File, Close, and Return to Excel. And I'm going to press Control J. And you'll notice it does 2 to the left, so it adds those together. But then it brings me 3 spaces down. Okay, so I keep on going, and now it's doing every 3 spaces. Every time it runs, it will add 2 to the left plus move 3 spaces. Okay, so we could customize this for however we like. I can make it every second space if I want. Okay, and let's delete these. Go back up here. I'll press Control J. I'll just hold down. And you'll notice that now it's doing 2 to the left, but for every second space. So it really depends how you want to do it. And we could have many, many multiple steps to do things. So for example, if we have a step that we want to take this number, add this number, subtract that number, multiply that number, plus add tax, and do a bunch of other things, we could assign one key press to that, and it will happen automatically. Okay? Again, macros will only run if they're in a macro-enabled workbook. So when I save this and I reopen it, it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to run macros on this computer? And you press yes, and you're good to go. Okay? It's important to also understand macro security, because if you have disabled all macros, then that means that it won't run at all when you try to reopen the file or you give it to somebody else. Disable all macros with notification means that by default the macros are turned off, but it gives you the option to turn them back on. Okay? And we're saving our macro inside of this particular workbook. So the code that I just showed you is saved in this sheet. We can't see it, but it's inside of there. Okay? Now, we can also, like we talked about in class, assign a button to do that, and let's do that now. So I'll go Insert Button. I'll drag one here, and it's going to say, what do you want to assign button with? And we're going to go macro 1. Press OK. And our button is going to be called to the left. All right, so basically, I go next to any two numbers, doesn't matter which two they are. Like, let's say, for example, I'm here, and it's going to add these two numbers together. Click the button, good to go. Here I click the button, good to go. You'll notice, again, it's jumping 2 spaces, because that's how we set it up. Or this one does 2 to the left, but there's no numbers there, so it comes back with a 0. Okay, and that's basically all there is to it. Now, slightly more complicated ones, like the printer one, relies on other pieces of code to make it work, and that could be a little more complicated to get it working properly. I would say before you do anything else, look at the code and see, is it trying to save the document to the right place or print it, etc. And then go from there. So for example, let's say we just want to print these cells, just these ones up here, which is part of the example that we did with the application. So I go to where it says print area, set print area, and now if I take a look down here, I can see this is the only thing that will print out. Okay, and we'll record a new macro to just print those cells, just these guys up here, and I'll press record, and we'll make this one Control K. All right, so it's recording now, and all I'm going to do is go to File, Print. I'm going to click on Microsoft Print to PDF and press print. Okay, it's going to ask me where I want to save the file, and I'm just going to call it test1. Okay, so it saves the file as test1, and now it's on the desktop, and it worked, right? It's good to go. So let's make a new button. I'll go to Developer, Insert, Button. Let's add a new button. And this one's going to be called Macro 2. And we're going to call this one Print to PDF. Okay, so basically whatever's in these cells is going to print out. Oops, I made a mistake. I forgot to stop recording. So I just recorded everything up until now, including making the button. So when I press this, it's going to say, where do you want to save it? So let's call it test 2. But now I think it's going to make a new button. But that's not the end of the world. Okay, so it actually did work. It printed the file. Let's see if we could see it here. Here it is. Okay, and it just printed those numbers. Now, I had an easy time using the Microsoft printer that was installed with Office, but the PDF printer, but I had a really hard time printing when I tried with a different one. Let's see, I go to File, Print, and when I picked one of my other ones, like I have PDF printer, it crashed and I couldn't make it work. Or I tried XPS printer, it wouldn't work. When I tried print to actual printer, like I have a label printer connected to my computer, that potentially did work, right? It would just print out a slip with just those numbers. So I think, so let's try again here. I'll move this over so you can see it. I'll press Print PDF. And it actually printed out the label with that on it. Okay, so it all just depends. It all just depends how you set it up and how you configure it, and keeping in mind that some of the drivers don't natively work doing this process, right? Because Microsoft Office has to be able to talk to those printers to make it work. But that's basically the idea of how the buttons work in the section of the textbook, right? The transfer example works basically the same way. I have 2 sheets, and I want to copy one over to the other, so I make a macro. We'll call this one Control H. Whoops, Control H. And it's recording. I'm just going to grab the top line and copy it. I'll go in here, paste special, and we'll paste values only. Okay, and then I'll go down to the next space. So it always starts one below. I have relative turned on. I'll press stop. And let's see if it works. So I'm going to press Control D to turn that off. I'll go over here and press Control H. And it didn't work. Let's take a look why. Here, maybe because it's only running from the same spot. Control H. No clue. So basically, it would take one more step to figure out what exactly is going wrong here and how to get the macro to copy it properly onto the second page. Let's try it one more time. Otherwise, it's up to you to figure out. Okay, so we'll go back up here. Macros. We'll run the macro. And we have an error. So, debugging it is part of the process, figuring out which cell you need to select and how we could make that happen. Let me try one more time, but this time we'll do it with relative references off. Okay, so it took me a couple tries, but I got it working. Basically, I go up here and select those cells. I'll go into macro number 4 and press run, and it will copy them into the other sheet. Okay, let's take a look at the code for a second for macro 4. And basically what it's doing is it goes range A1 select, which is going to be our fixed cells because in the transfer area they don't change, so I turned off relative. It will grab the cells of those numbers and then copy them onto the other sheet on sheet 2 and then paste them and then go down one space. So basically you can get it to work. It just takes a little bit of playing around with it to make sure that it works. And that's basically all the examples that we have with macros so far in the textbook. But macros are really useful because you could make them do so many different things. Like we have 2 to the left, but I could also make add 4 to the left, right? And then, or I could say add column or drag down or so on, right? So, and you could also use formulas, which is pretty cool too. So let's record a macro, for example, and this one will make Control G. Okay, and we're basically going to just write equals sum. And we're going to grab all the numbers. Okay, that's the only thing the macro does. Now, the interesting thing is that as we change these, as we change these numbers, okay, this will keep on updating, but we don't necessarily need that there. We could put it anywhere, press Control G, and it will pop up there and give us the range. Now, the reason why it's going back up here is because we have use relative references turned off. If it was turned on and I click down here, then the 843,000, well, I guess this is why we have commas, right? The 8 million would show up down here or wherever else I click. Okay, because it's relative to what cell is active as opposed to what cell I started from. But regardless, if I change the numbers inside of here and I press Control G, it will automatically go and sum this entire thing. And we could have this using multiple formulas and multiple steps. We could use nested formulas. There's really a lot of options of what we could tie into a macro. And the idea is to automate repetitive steps or to give you really quick tools to speed things up. For example, adding tax and tip and subtotal and total in one step really quickly without having to go through the formulas. All right, so I hope that helps make things a little clearer. If you have any questions or comments, send me an email. Thank you. Talk to you later.